Dr. Jill Stein. So I'll have the honor of introducing Dr. Jill Stein. First, I'll introduce myself very quickly. My name is Fernando Serrano. I'm the outreach coordinator for the Green Party of Tulare County, and we were very lucky to have Dr. Jill Stein here to come speak about the Green New Deal and how it applies, or it can apply, to the Central Valley. I don't need to introduce Dr. Jill Stein too much. If you're here, most likely you know who she is. But very quickly, I mean, as most of you know, she was a presidential candidate for the Green Party 2012, 2016. And she has been a long-term activist in many different social, economic, environmental, and health issues. Now, one of the things that I did want to mention very quickly is that, first of all, thank Dr. Jill Stein for accepting the invitation to come here to Porterville. And one of the things that I wanted to emphasize with her visit here is how important the progressive movement is throughout the country, and not only in big urban centers. The progressive movement is not just about San Francisco, Los Angeles, or Boston, or something else. No, it's small communities like us, like Porterville, like Tulare, like Lindsay, all of us working together for a progressive future. So that's one of the most important and significant aspects of Dr. Jill Stein accepting to come to Porterville to speak about the political platform that she has proposed in the past, which is the New Deal, and how it applies to the Central Valley, and in particular, how it is an emergency for us to apply it here in the Central Valley. We already know about the environmental consequences or the environmental issues that we face on a daily basis here. So she's going to address some of those issues, and without any further ado, here is Dr. Jill Stein.
Thank you all so much. It's an honor to be here, and I want to give a big thank you to Fernando Serrano for arranging for me to come and for doing some really exciting work here in the Central Valley. And I just want to get a sense of, who's here tonight, and is this Green Party? Where's your hand? Yeah. And if you're not Green Party, but you're community, are there any community folks here? What? All right, okay, well, that's good. Thank you so much. Great. And I'm just curious from the community folks, how you heard about this. Are you part of the political campaigns that Fernando's been involved with, or you just read about it in a newspaper and you thought, this is weird, and you decided to come out? Just any quick...
I saw a flyer at the Starbucks down here.
All right, okay. Anyone else just coming out of, yeah? Local activists, all right, great. On what, can I ask?
Pretty much everything Fernando probably told you about, and more LGBT issues, health issues, science and other kinds of things around here, just general justice issues in the Central Valley.
Great, and for those who couldn't hear on our live stream, the gentleman was saying that he is here as a local activist, and I said, on what? And he said, just the whole spectrum of justice issues, from environmental justice, pesticides, water, food, LGBTQ issues, the whole range. So that's, like Fernando was saying, it's not all conservatives out here in the Central Valley and in rural areas. There are a lot of people who are, fighting for the world we deserve, and for healthcare, and for jobs, and for clean water, and things like that. And yes, back there.
The Facebook events.
Oh, you saw the Facebook events. All right. So Facebook still has some value left to it. Yeah. in spite of the news this week about and just seeking, hiring these attack firms to silence their critics. It's like, they accuse Russians of sowing discord. Well, no, it turns out it's Facebook that's sowing discord. Somebody else was gonna shout out. Okay, over here.
There were flyers at Porterville College.
Okay, all right, great. And are you student, faculty?
Faculty.
Okay, great. What department?
English.
In English. Okay, great. Wonderful. Anyone else from the community want to shout out? Yeah. Well, we'll have more time to talk, so I'll get things going here. But this is why I was, really excited to come here, because things are changing, and there is a progressive force that's rising all over the country, and sort of out of necessity and in desperation, because there's some really, terrible things that are happening, whether you're looking at rising fascism, the deportations, the skyrocketing costs of healthcare and housing, but particularly in the Central Valley, with this horrific and tragic fire that really represents the climate crisis, I think, coming home. And, this is sort of end stage, and it's like now or never. It's like all hands on deck right now, and it's really exciting. The midterm elections, at least the stranglehold of Donald Trump and the Republicans has been broken. That's a really great thing, and more power to everyone that had something to do with that. It's very exciting to see that the country is capable of breaking out of that. But it's important that we not just stop there, because as you may know, there was more big money pouring into this election than ever before. And that blue wave is still a corporate wave. It may not be a Trump wave, but it's still a corporate wave. And what is it that generated Trumpism and this rightward surge to start with, but the betrayal of working people? And, when our great progressive, or should I say the symbol of progressivism in the form of the last president, when he had both houses of Congress and had an incredible mandate from the American people, what happened? What happened was that Wall Street got bailed out and everyday people got really thrown under the bus. And that's when Congress was lost to the Republicans. So we don't fix Trumpism just by going back to what created it. That's why, as Greens, we're fighting for a different kind of progressivism, a kind of progressivism that's not on the corporate payroll, that's not getting money from agribusiness and the fossil fuel companies and the big banks. And I think here in the Central Valley, it's kind of a poster child of where this predatory politics has taken us. And I think, people who live around here know better than anyone the price that you're paying for being here. The price you're paying for agribusiness, for the worst air quality in California, among the worst in the whole country, water pollution, drought, communities whose wells have run dry, and who are forced, many, to drink polluted water because they don't have access to anything else. The industry of agribusiness doesn't give workers much to live on and no benefits, and so this is a place of incredible poverty and just sort of hopelessness. So it's really exciting to see in the midst of all that that there is this rising force, and both some of the campaigns that we've heard of, and I know that Fernando was working, or still is working on a really exciting campaign that is right now hanging in the balance. They're like, how many votes? How many votes? How many? 19 votes behind right now and catching up. Yeah, so is that Daniel? Yeah, so stand up, Daniel, say hi. There's Daniel Penarosa himself. So thank you for your courage. I think it takes incredible courage to stand up in a community that's supposed to be wall-to-wall conservative, but in fact it's mostly Latino, is it not? Many undocumented, but many who are not, and many voters. And this is just, I think, such an inspiration across the nation. There are, I think it's 29 million Latino voters right now who could make such an incredible difference in the whole future of the country if we can provide something that's worth coming out to vote for. So it's really great that you're getting out there, and one of the things that Daniel was able to do is go door to door. And you personally, do you know how many doors you knocked on?
Oh man, several hundred.
Several hundred, yes, and I heard altogether your campaign is up there in 1,000 or 2,000 doors.
Yeah, well, we knocked almost every single household that had a voter registry. Yeah,
Oh, that's incredible.
That was part of our grassroots campaign. Is, as a public servant, how can you really invest in public servitude and going door to door and talking to voters and asking them, regardless of what party you may represent, it's the concerns of the community we're arguing. And you can only do that best by knocking the doors and have those conversations.
And I heard that you actually targeted non-voters. Is this true? Yeah, yeah, that's really exciting. And yes, let's thank you for that. And there's so much to be learned here from the example that your campaign is setting. And I know that there are nonprofits and citizen groups in the community too that have been fighting against pesticides, so-called CAPS, which stands for, again, remind me.
Advocates for pesticide safety.
Yes, so big thank you to CAPS. I think, they have been focusing, I've heard, on Roundup and getting Roundup out of schools. Roundup should be out of all schools. It really should be out of use altogether. And they're also fighting against chlorpyrifos, also known as Dursban. Is that correct? I know that the Lorsban and Dorsban. Okay. Like 15 years ago, it was banned from household uses, but not banned from, farm workers and food crops and farming communities. So it's on the food, it gets in the water. It's something like 87%. Anybody know that there's an amazing study that was done actually in 2012. So they had good reason in 2012 to ban it because it was found to be in the blood of newborn babies. 87% of newborn babies in farming communities had this toxic chemical in their blood. A chemical which messes with your neurotransmitters, that is, the hormones in your brain. This is how brain cells talk to each other through these neurotransmitters. And chlorpyrifos is, if I'm remembering my science correctly, it is an organophosphate pesticide. Okay. And organophosphates are basically derived from nerve gas. It's a nerve poison. That's how it kills ants and roaches. It poisons their nervous system. But nature conserves these things up through the evolutionary chain. So we use these same neurotransmitters in our brain. So, it's like absolutely nuts to be using this entire class of chemicals. And once it was discovered in 2012, there was just absolutely no excuse. And so to me, this just keeps driving home why it is that it's not like the Democrats are going to save us, and like we just have to get rid of Donald Trump and everything will be fine. Because the way things are right now, from the deportations, from the incarceration state, from the militarization of our border, and just shame on Donald Trump for this horrific concocted crisis on the border, like that sick, poor women and children, are going to attack the U.S. Army. It's just, what a concocted, just political scam that was to try to drum up votes for himself. And I think it's fair to say this strategy is not working for him. But, the point here being that these really critical things that are happening now, including the horrific fires, this is not new. This is just like a continued intensifying of this crisis. And, in the Green Party, we sum it all up. We say this is about people, planet, and peace over profit. And all pieces of that are really important. You can't get a world that works for us just by focusing on one piece. And the profit piece is a big part of that, because for corporations, the bottom line is their profits. So they're not going to do the right thing, whether it's on pesticides or the food that they grow or the fossil fuels that they use. They're not going to do it for us. And remember, more money, big money, went into this election than ever before. Over $5 billion in expenditures. Yeah, this is like an all-time record for a non-presidential year. And it's the money spent in the congressional campaigns was more than even during a congressional year. So it was an all-out record, and most of that money went to Democrats. This was like the first time that Democrats exceeded Republicans. So some people will say, oh, that's because the base came out. It's because small donors came out. But no, actually, that may be true for the vote, but the money that went into this was largely from deep pockets. It was only around 20% that came from small donors. So most of this was coming from big money, and you could see it in the agenda that the congressional candidates were running on. It was the military, a big surge of former military and so-called intelligence, that is the security state personnel. We saw Congress just a few months back overwhelmingly support the same military agenda that the Democrats supported basically the Republican military agenda, supported the biggest military budget that we've ever seen, now taking about 60% of our dollars. The deregulation of the big banks, rolling back Dodd-Frank. The Democrats, again, were overwhelmingly in support of that. You had Nancy Pelosi promising that she would go slow on climate, that she would hold hearings, as if we haven't had enough hearings. Can we afford more years thrown into hearings? To me, this is why, I just come out of this crisis and seeing the fires and the aftermath of the fires. Is it like 600 people that are still missing now? 1,000 now. The news while I was flying across country. Yeah, it's no surprise, given the ferocity of that fire and how quickly it erupted. It's just too tragic to imagine. And now a whole community is left homeless, and they were setting up tents in the parking lot. And thank you to Sadie and Eric and the other Greens who were there, Can we give a just shout out and a thank you for community spirit? This really is an all hands on deck moment, and I want to underscore that in spite of, this message that the Dems aren't going to save us, the Republicans aren't going to save us, to me, it's still a very hopeful moment, because if you look at who's out there, and this is what Daniel is proving in his race, there's enormous community spirit, human values, which I would call progressive values. Progressive values are human values, and that community spirit is alive and well. It has been discouraged, it's been thrown under the bus, it's been betrayed by politics as usual, but it's still there, and given an opportunity, it will come out, especially as things get as desperate as they are. So, to my mind, that's the really exciting thing that's happening right now. As bad as things are getting, it's helping to mobilize what really is a silenced majority. It's not a silent majority, it's a silenced majority. People who've been sort of shut out and thrown under the bus enough that they're kind of sitting back and waiting. And that's our job. We are locked out of debates and often out of press coverage because the powers that be are really scared that word should get out. And if you look at what's happened over the years, what's happened to the green agenda? We didn't just change the debate, we've won the debate. On single payer, on green energy, on equal marriage, on free public higher education. The issues that we've put out, are really getting traction, even though they have been silencing us. So still, word gets out, and it's door to door, and it's phone call campaigns, and it's email lists. So, I just want to encourage people that not only are we winning the day, we may not be winning elections yet, although we might be, we are winning some. And especially here in California, we are winning local races. And we saw our congressional candidates take a big leap forward. I think one of them might even be here. Let's see, is Laura in the room? Yes, so a big thank you to Laura Wells for leading the charge. And Rodolfo and Kenneth, who achieved 26%. What's that? 27 even, up to 27%. And that's, basically even without money and without press coverage, just kind of getting out of the starting gate. So we are moving forward. But remember, the biggest group of voters are the people who are not voting. And they are millennial, they are black and brown, and they are, what's the other? Poor. Yes. Those are the three characteristics, okay? But that's most of America. It's about 1 in 2 Americans right now that are in poverty or near poverty. So, there is critical mass here to break through. And just remember, the people who are waiting to hear from us have enough numbers that they can move this agenda forward. Just the number of people who are locked into student debt alone is, trying to remember the number, I think it's 43 million. It might be a little bit more than that by now. It's a huge number of voters. And, in 2016, the powers that be were just really quaking in their boots that word was going to get out, because that brings people out to vote in a very big way. People who are ready to organize, they're on campuses, they can engage really fast. They are kind of alienated and down and out right now because of what they've been offered, which is, a climate disaster and no jobs and a life of debt and no way to break out of it. So of course they're tuned out. But the minute, in my experience, the minute they hear that they actually have an agenda for a welcoming path to citizenship, for legalization, for DACA, and not just for DACA. You know, in my view, it should be for all refugees, all immigrants who've been forced to leave their homes, basically, because their economy has been exploited and abused, or because the war on drugs has made, violence the order of the day, or because the U.S. has asserted its power to create a coup, or a death squad, or, overthrow local democracy. So we owe a great debt to the people who have been forced to migrate from, my friends who've made that journey. They don't do it because they want to, they do it because they have to, because the risks of staying in a community of violence are far greater than the risks of migrating, which are considerable. So this is a debt that we owe, and if, for those who, are upset about the migration crisis, well, how about we stop causing it in the first place? So I want to just say a few words about the Green New Deal, and then we'll open it up for your thoughts and your questions, because, the name of the game here right now is we got an emergency, and it's a climate emergency, it's a jobs emergency, it's a debt emergency, it's a deportation emergency. It's like, you don't know where to start, almost. But there's, there are very good solutions for all of these crises. So, for example, free public higher education pays for itself many times over. For every dollar that the government puts in for public funding, we get back 7 times over. So that's a no-brainer. Medicare for all, just extending the age of eligibility basically down to zero. Down to minus 9 months, actually. That, it costs less than what we're paying right now, and it would cost far less for people who are not wealthy, who cannot afford health care right now. The cost would be distributed progressively, so that those who are capable can pay back by helping to foot the bill. So that's a no-brainer. Clean green energy is a no-brainer, and one little factoid to take home is that we save so much money by moving to clean energy, 100%. We save so much money in health benefits and health improvements that savings alone is enough to pay the cost of the green energy transition. So people who say we can't afford it, they really don't know what they're talking about, because in fact, it actually pays for itself. So let me say a little bit more about the Green New Deal. That too is a big win, because we've been talking about it at least since, in 2012 and 2016, it was the focus of our campaign. Back in 2010, Howie Hawkins was talking about it in his governor's campaign. So it's been out there. And now suddenly, it's being picked up by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others, not mentioning where it came from, but, at least we've won on, we've injected it into the public discourse. And, the Democrats are not going to pass this. There's, Nancy Pelosi, I don't know what she did when they had that occupation in her office. Did you hear about that? There's a big sit-in. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had some very nice words about how Nancy Pelosi is basically an activist. So, this will reach back to her good old days, and so maybe she'll let this go forward. Well, Nancy Pelosi said before the election and after the election that she's adopting these new budget rules. they're not new. The Democrats used them last time they were in power. The Republicans don't, but the Democrats have sort of adopted the Republican line that you have to pay with a tax increase anytime you want a program. If you want a new program, like for healthcare or for the environment or green jobs, you're gonna have to raise taxes somewhere else. That used to be what the Republicans would say. Now it's what the Democrats say. Republicans don't worry about it at all. So Nancy Pelosi is wedded to that. So there's no way, in heaven that Nancy Pelosi is going to allow a Green New Deal to move forward in the least. But let me talk about it and just explain. Have people heard about it? Are you familiar with it? Yes. Okay. Is it new to anybody here? Is it? Okay, great. All right, good. So let me just run through it. It is basically an emergency jobs program that would ensure that essentially everybody has the right to a job. It's sort of like the New Deal that helped get us out of the Great Depression, mostly got us out of the Great Depression until they went to war. It also helped get us out of the Great Depression. So it's like that in that it provides jobs, but these will be jobs with a specific purpose, which is to achieve 100% clean renewable energy by 2030. And that's what the UN tells us we have to do, that we've got about a decade or so to get out of this pit that we're in. So the Green New Deal would do that through jobs in clean renewable energy, sustainable and healthy food production, that is organic food, which basically has a zero carbon footprint, and public transportation would be the focus, as well as infrastructure, ecosystem restoration, and social jobs too, because for communities to be sustainable means you have to be sustainable socially as well as ecologically. So that means people need jobs, they need homes, communities with people sleeping on the street because there are no affordable homes are not sustainable communities either. So all of these are part of what the Green New Deal gets funded to do. And the idea is it would be funded federally, but implemented and managed locally so that it's local communities. It's not a cookie cutter, but it's local communities deciding what they do and what they need. And the money would be targeted to community-based enterprises, especially cooperative enterprises, so community co-ops or worker co-ops, and small businesses, but not multinational corporations who take the profits and, send them offshore or overseas. The idea is to help revive the economy at the same time that you're fixing the climate. So the Green New Deal is sort of a triple win. It would revive the economy at the same time that it turns the tide on climate change quickly, and guess what? It makes wars for oil obsolete. Yeah, how about that? And, as if that wasn't good enough, it also pays for itself essentially by making us healthier. And that's not just an abstract idea. This actually happened in the country of, anybody know? Where did they do? What's that?
Cuba.
Yes, in Cuba. In Cuba, the pipeline went down when the old Soviet Union collapsed. Suddenly, there was no fossil fuels. So what happened? For food, they got out their plans, because they had blueprints, for how to create an organic food system in their universities. So they got the plans out, they got out their draft animals, and they put a lot of people to work. And they paid farmers very well. So overnight, they converted to a largely plant-based organic food system. Also, they got out their bicycles, and you no longer had roads cluttered with traffic. So people got around either by bikes, and then there were some buses. But all of a sudden people were using muscle power again. And the third thing that happened was that suddenly there was no air pollution or other pollution. So their economy's crashing because they've lost their really single trade partner, and they don't have outside support anymore, so they're really in tough shape. You'd think their health would have taken a nosedive, but what actually happened? Their death rate from diabetes went down 50%. Their death rate from heart attacks and strokes went down, I think, 25 to 30%. And their death rates across the board went down about 18%. And how much did it cost them? Nothing. And what do we spend?
Too much.
Over $3 trillion a year. That's more than we even spend on the military, which is about $1 trillion. But it's over $3 trillion a year that we spend not on a healthcare system, but on a sick care system, because what's making us sick? The pollution, a very sick food system, and a, sort of an environment in which people cannot use their muscle power to get around. It's dangerous if you do that. I mean, it's dangerous in most places to bike or for kids to walk to school. Things like that just don't happen. So it's no wonder we're extremely sick. And, we got all these chemicals that are making us sick. And the chemicals, guess what? I was shocked to learn this. Most toxic chemicals are actually derived from fossil fuels. So, if fossil fuels go away, then a whole lot of the toxic chemicals. Plus, you don't need pesticides, right? If you're in an organic food system, you don't use pesticides, and you don't need fertilizers, so you're not polluting your water supply. So it's like this win-win-win, and it pays for itself. And it allows us to cut the military budget because we no longer need to be fighting for scarce resources because we've got them here. And it's really good for workers too, because no one is more at risk from fossil fuels than the people in the industry, whether they're on a frack site or they're driving a truck with frack waste or delivering fossil fuels, or they're in a refinery. I mean, this is where you have explosions and equipment collapse. And that's just like the acute risk, the immediate risk. When you walk into a fossil fuel job, your risk of dying on the job goes up 7-fold, like 700%, just from walking in the door. And that doesn't even account for the long-term risks, which are like heart disease and cancers and so on. So it's really good for the workers. Here's what's not good for the workers. Fossil fuel industry was coming into its own in the early to mid-1900s. And at that time, after all the labor unrest in the 1930s, the Wagner Act was passed. That was like part of the New Deal. And the Wagner Act basically gave workers the right to have a union, the right to collective bargaining, and that was really integrated into the development of the fossil fuel industry, which is why there's some really good jobs there, and they pay really good benefits. But when workers get displaced from those jobs, and they go into the, setting up solar farms and so on, or doing weatherization in a home, suddenly they're paid minimum wage. It's a gig economy job. Sometimes they have it, sometimes they don't. It's extremely insecure. That's where the New Deal comes in, because the New Deal, at least as we talk about it as Greens, also includes this component about justice for workers and a just transition. And unions can play a really important role. There's a whole union movement called Trade Unions for Energy Democracy. Let me just explain energy democracy. That's the concept that if energy decisions are made by private industry, they're always going to be made for maximum profit and maximum benefit to the industry. So how in the world are we ever going to expect the industry to phase itself out or not to use that 85% of fossil fuels in the ground that have to stay in the ground. If they don't stay in the ground, you know, the science tells us that we'll never survive the climate thing. You know, they've talked about 2 degrees warming as being the critical threshold. We don't want to go past that. Probably it needs to be more like 1 degree warming, which we're almost at right now, if you really were to set this realistically. But it's very clear that if we don't keep most of the fossil fuels in the ground, we're going over the waterfall, and we're heading there right now. So the fossil fuel industry is not going to do it. And there are very good arguments made that the market economy alone can't do it, and it certainly can't do it fast enough. And that's largely because the industry is just too big and powerful. And if you shut it down, you know, if you plug one little hole in the dam, there's going to be another one somewhere else. The industry just has its tentacles everywhere. Gar Alperovitz, I'll just put that name out there, an economist who's just really incredible, and he has sort of adopted the Green New Deal as his purpose. And I had a chance to sit down and read some of this stuff before coming out here because I knew we were going to be talking about the Green New Deal, and I was just absolutely blown away. It's so much easier to, what shall I say, have a debate about this now because there's just really good stuff written. His project is called the Next System Project, and you can Google it, and there's just great material that, for example, gives really compelling arguments about why we need to buy out the fossil fuel industry and put them out of business so that we're in charge of our energy decisions and they're not. What else can I tell you? Oh, a couple other things about the Green New Deal. The idea is that we have an energy democracy so that we get to decide what kind of energy is sustaining our planet or destroying our planet, because that's what the decision is. It should not be made by a private vested interest, which is vested in destroying the planet. They shouldn't be the ones calling the shots here. So we do need to democratize our energy system. That is a critical foundation of the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal also comes with an economic Bill of Rights because that too is critical. We've got to keep people alive and well on our way to a healthy planet. We got to keep the people, sustained and healthy, as well as the ecosystems. So, as part of the Green New Deal, we also call for healthcare as a human right for everyone, free public higher education, strong public schools, a tax base that calls on the wealthiest to contribute their fair share because their contributions have been cut over recent decades enormously as the burden's been raised on everyday working people and so on. So that's the basics of the Green New Deal. And it's an exciting project because it can bring us together in communities, labor, health advocates, environmental advocates, and so on a project that's going to take all of us. And clearly, it's going to take all of us to change the course. Right now, we're on a trajectory that's just not going to work, but it's not a trajectory that's supported by most people. So that's why we're here fighting the fight that we're on. And I just want to thank everybody for coming out and being a part of this and encourage you. I'm going to actually pass around a sign-up sheet if you're interested. I'm part of a new home base, Green Uprising, which is sort of, it's kind of like what we need. And it can fill in some of the gaps that the party cannot do right now because it's busy doing a lot of infrastructure work, shall we say. So we're in an emergency and we can't wait for anything. So Green Uprising is how we turn resistance from the last election into outright rebellion in the next. and do what we need to do to create an America and a world that works for all of us, because it is within our reach if we stand up and make it so. In the words of Alice Walker, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. We do, and this is that all hands on deck moment when it's time for us to stand up and be heard and work together to, to make it so. We can have the future that we need in order to survive, but only if we decide to move ahead and make it happen. So I'm going to pass around those sign-up sheets, and maybe we can just have your thoughts and your comments. So thank you so much for being here tonight and for your kind attention. So I'm going to just take a stack here of a few people who want to. So this gentleman will be first, and this gentleman, and then Woody third, and this person here, that'll be four. Let's start with that, and then we'll go from there.
This is a two-part question. What the problem of it is you get 33% of the votes, and the Democrats get 60% of the votes. It seems to me that we can't seem to get past the fact is that the Green Party is either the spoiler, that they've won the election for the Democrats and who elected Trump. That's the big thing that's going on. And the second thing that seems to be happening is that we caused Trump to win. So it seems like we need to have a PR campaign to figure out why they think Green Party is just a spoiler, not a legitimate party, but just to get in the way. So how do we fix that?
Thank you. That's a great question, and I'm so glad you brought that up. Let's give you this. I'm going to pass around that sign-up sheet. Yes, and I meant to get to that because anybody heard of ranked choice voting?
Yeah. Stephanie Miller talked about it.
Yeah. So it is happening in a big way. So for those who haven't heard, because you're not supposed to know about this, it's supposed to be kept secret. We could have a voting system that actually lets you vote your values and not worry about the strategy of your vote. If ever there's a time and a need to just express your values, democracy needs values to guide it. If you're just going to the election to vote against the person you hate the most, instead of for the person that represents you, democracy has no moral compass. How does it ever know where it's going? It just knows who people think is most toxic. That doesn't help us. That doesn't give us a direction or a vision forward or a reason to come out and engage. So ranked choice voting lets you go to the polls and just rank your choices. 1, 2, 3. You can vote for the candidate you truly support as your number one. If that candidate loses, your vote is automatically reassigned to your second choice. So there's no splitting of the vote. There's no throwing your vote away. And there's also no accidental elections where someone gets into office because there happen to be two people representing the other vision.
Top two.
Sure. Or, like in Maine, what happened in Maine, where they had a progressive and a Democrat and then this really scary Republican who got in. I say with Greens, I don't buy the spoiler thing for Greens in the first place because most Green voters are not going to vote for a Democrat in the first place. It's just true. And for Democrats to say that they own our votes is a sign of the arrogance that causes so many people not to vote Democrat in the first place, because they just assume that votes belong to them. And that's not a very endearing kind of thing. So ranked choice voting lets you vote the way you want. It also lets a lot more candidates be part of the conversation. In Maine, where they adopted it by voter referendum, the legislature tried to stop them because they don't want competition. They tried to stop it twice, went back, and people voted on it again and passed it overwhelmingly. So they had 4 candidates in this election for Congress, and a Democrat, a Republican, and 2 independents. And nobody was like smearing the independents for running. They were fine, and if it was a green and a libertarian, it would just be enlarging the conversation. So you don't hear these smear campaigns and fear campaigns when you have ranked choice voting. It did really great, and it happens that they were really close. The Democrat and Republican were really close, and the independent candidates made the difference. So when their votes were reassigned, the Democrat won, suggesting that ranked choice voting enables a more kind of progressive sentiment to be expressed, and that it actually taps where people are at in a more accurate way. So it does seem to be moving forward in a very big way. And in fact, the governor-elect, said that she was going to work to expand it so that it would be applied to all statewide offices. Right now it's just congressional. So it's really exciting to hear that. And in my home state, in Massachusetts, I was first tricked into running for office in 2002. So we brought a ranked choice bill to the legislature, and a progressive Democrat proposed it. It went into committee, and it's been in committee for 18 years. They won't let it out because they're afraid it would get passed. It really calls their bluff. It's like, reminds me of the parable of Solomon and the baby, They would rather see the baby cut. They'd rather see our democracy injured than risk losing their stranglehold on power. Yeah, but the Republicans are the same way. It was fought in Maine by both big parties. They don't want to risk their monopolies. So, but that's not true for people. And remember, the largest voting bloc right now are independent. They identify as independent. It's a landslide majority of voters. And then add the non-voters, those are also not Democrats or Republicans, and they're not voting. So there's an enormous number of people here who would benefit from this. I just want people to feel really encouraged and positive that this is within our reach. So if you can remember who is thank you for the question. Who is number 2? Yes. Okay.
So first, I want to thank you for coming here to Porterville, which is a pretty remote place. We don't often get prominent speakers of any type in this area. Even our own representatives in Congress won't come to us. And we have very powerful representatives in Congress. This area is represented by Kevin McCarthy, and just across Porterville city line is Devin Nunes.
Oh my God.
So they don't come talk to us, and we appreciate that you do. So thank you for that. My question is, I just heard you say you've been on the campaign trail since 2002. Okay, and you proposed something that has been in committee for 18 years. So that's one thing I heard. While you were speaking, it seemed like you were advocating for the outcome that for the United States that Cuba had during this period after they lost their only trading partner, as you said. So I wonder if you can speak to the specifics of how that would scale to the United States. We're probably at least 1,000 times bigger than Cuba. We have a different climate than they have, so farming is an issue in providing food, and how that affects our trade, our property rights, our voting rights, our foreign policy. All of that is sort of brushed over by just the high view that you get. So I wonder if you could speak to some of that.
Sure. I think we need like a week's conference on this. And in fact, I'm hoping that the next annual meeting for the National Green Party will focus on ranked choice voting so that we can all take it back to our states and initiate movements and referendums to make ranked choice voting the law of the land, and that we can also focus on the Green New Deal and the kinds of emergency action that we need to take. There's not just one Green New Deal, you know, and there are, you know, there's a lot of debate to be had. What happened at the time of the New Deal was that there were first experiments at the level of local communities and states, and those were then adopted at the national level and promoted. It wasn't a perfect program by any means, but it did the job, and it got the US economy back on track and got money circulating again, got people to work, and you know, revived the economy. Right now, we're gonna hit the wall really soon on the track that we're on. So, you know, it's like, you don't need a perfect program to improve over what our baseline is right now. Our baseline is extinction. That's kind of like where we're headed. So we can afford to take some risks here. But your questions are all really good. And I'll just try to answer some of them, you know, very broad brushstroke. Also, this is why the Green New Deal doesn't say it's one cookie cutter thing, but it's rather putting money and resources into the hands of communities and then giving them guidelines for how it needs to be spent. In terms of its foreign policy, you know, it would really result in a, what should we say, a defense department, which becomes a defense department instead of an offense department. And that would be a really good thing. In terms of our energy and jobs, you know, there are millions of jobs that can be created in sustainable agriculture, in energy, in creating a new transportation system, a new electrical grid. I mean, there's a mountain of infrastructure work that needs to be done. In terms of the food system, this is a big debate, you know, in the organic community world, but I know that the UN has put out reports to the effect that organic agriculture can match industrial agriculture in terms of production and be sustainable, because industrial agriculture is not. It's draining our water supply, it's polluting our water supply, it's eroding our topsoil, you know, and the food that it produces is making us sick. So it's not, you know, it's not hard to imagine improving on that enormously. It'll take a lot of work, but there's a lot of evidence, you know, to show that this can be done, and it's the power and influence of that industry that accounts for its monopoly. It's not like it, you know, it has succeeded of its own accord. So there's some off-the-cuff ideas for you, but I invite you to the Green Party annual meeting. It's going to be in Massachusetts, in my home state, in July next year. So everybody, you're invited. Come on down. Let's see. There's another question for 3. Okay, Woody, yes.
So Woody Hastings, Sonoma County. Always very happy to hear you talk about energy democracy and the Green New Deal as it relates to greenhouse gas reductions and jobs. Here in California, there is currently an energy democracy movement underway. It doesn't get a lot of attention, and it's not really all that well known, but it's happening. It's in the form of community choice energy, community choice aggregation. Have people heard of it in the room? Not too many. A few people have heard of it. And you have heard. You have Cape Light Compact in Massachusetts. That's the community choice aggregator there. There's about 9% of these. It's enabled. It's made possible by state law. And what it does is precisely millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, current revenue stream that goes to the private sector in this neck of the woods in Southern California. Edison, up where we are in Sonoma County, is Pacific Gas and Electric. The state law that was passed here in 2002 makes it possible for that revenue stream to shift into local control, so the communities can use that money to purchase solar, wind, geothermal, hydro instead of fossil, nuclear, and the like. And so we're going to be talking about this tomorrow at 1 o'clock. And so it's a movement here in California. There were 2 of these agencies in California in 2014. There's now 19 operational, serving 7 million people, so it is a movement. And these are not-for-profit agencies open to the public. You go to the meetings, the decision-making meetings, try knocking on a boardroom door of Edison or PG&E to weigh in on your energy decisions, right? It's not going to happen. So, or go to the California Public Utilities Commission. Yeah, that's a lot of fun. Anyway, the question is, you talk about, cooperatives or, community control. Here's a mechanism. So the question is, I didn't hear you talk about community choice energy specifically in what you said. The Green Party could have a movement around the country to get state laws passed. There's like 9 or 10 right now. We need more states to pass this law so this mechanism is available, right? So have you looked at community choice as a mechanism to actually do this? Because there are rural cooperatives, public power where you actually do poles and wires. This doesn't involve that. It doesn't involve that investment. PG&E, SoCal Edison, they still do the poles and the wires. So either community choice or other models that you want to propose as mechanisms to actually do this. Because how do you actually do it? How do the community take control of its power? That's what.
Great, yes, exactly. That is the question. And this is a model which is up and running. And I only began learning about it like yesterday when I was sort of making some inquiries, and I talked to June to say, like, what's going on in California? And I heard about it, and actually I haven't had time to do my homework and my reading about it. But yeah, it sounds really great, and I think it's really important to have this discussion. It's not like there's going to be one clear road forward, but this is one that's up and running, and I think it's really important we talk about it, and that it be part of a broader discussion, which I'm hoping we'll have, because I think there's a lot of interest and attention that's being paid to us right now around this crisis, which is really blowing up in our faces right now. And if this fire, the campfire, isn't the writing on the wall, what will it take? So I think it's really time for us to double down and get really clear about what are the options here? What are things we can start doing right now at the community level, even while we're working on bigger visions of buying out the fossil fuel industry? That's going to take a while. That's not going to happen overnight. And it would be, really exciting to explore what's the synergy here, how can we kind of kickstart this thing? I think that'd be great. And I want to give you a big thank you, because I know you've been working on this for how long? That's about it. Let's see. Mel, I'm going to get to you in 1 minute. So over.
Just a little bit off topic, one thing that I noticed that you doing an investigation.
Because there was massive voter suppression, in Georgia, 300,000 at least who were stripped of their, of their voting rights through, just elaborate schemes of the Secretary of State. Just the fact that our elections are controlled by partisan officials in the first place is nonsense. I mean, how do you get anything done with that except suspicious, suspicious influencing, and it's like in 2016, they just wanted to blame the Russians for the whole thing. And like, is this election any less chaotic than it was in 2016? But there were no Russians to be found, so it's almost like recounts are used now to like distract people and to kind of bury them in a bureaucratic procedure, so everybody kind of throws up their hands and goes away. I just want to say, we have court cases which are still ongoing from the 2016 recount. The purpose of the recount in 2016 was not necessarily to overturn the election, but to restore confidence in the vote, because there was not confidence in the election or the vote. So we really wanted to re-examine the votes and do it by hand, because that's the only way you can do it. You can't do a recount by putting ballots back into the same machines whose results you're questioning to start with. And that's how these recounts were done, except for certain categories of ballots. But they all should have been recounted by hand. All votes should be subject, well, first they should all take place on hand-marked paper ballots, and then they should be either subject to an audit, so-called, the fancy name, risk-limiting audit, which means that the closer the count is, the more votes you got to look at with eyeballs to be sure that you have a cross-check on these machines. Because even if they're being counted in a scanner, that's still a machine. Or they should be counted by hand in a public forum where there are competing parties and ordinary citizens who are all witnessing the count and all agreeing on the count. Elections have to be transparent. If they're not transparent, they just can't be trusted, and people don't trust them. So machines are inherently problematic, because how many times can you get their internal stuff examined to be sure that it hasn't been messed with? Which, is why the more eyeballs you can have on votes, the better. The court cases that we have ongoing right now try to elevate our procedures and ensure that there will be paper ballots, that there will be intensive auditing of all votes. And there would be automatic recounts when they're close or if there are some questions. And we're waiting on the results of those cases, which should be happening soon, like the next 6 months. That's soon in terms of the legal system. It moves very slowly. But the bigger lesson, in my view, is that we really need an emergency People's Commission on election protection and voting justice. It's not only the machines, it's not only voter suppression, it's the money that biases the whole playing field to start with. It's the media that won't cover alternative candidates. It's the rules of ballot access that prevent people from having choices except the same old, corporate-sponsored political parties. It's the debates, which must be open. People want to hear. We have a right not only to vote, we have a right to know who we can vote for. It should be fixed across the board, because a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And there are a whole lot of links in the chain of our elections and our democracy. And they all need fixing. So to me, that's the bottom line, is that we need to go back to the drawing boards and make sure that we have elections that are accurate, secure, and just, and free of Jim Crow, so that we can really trust them. How? How do we get that? It's very hard to organize on elections. Elections have to be part of a broader agenda. That's why I'm a member of a political party. Because if you only organize on one issue, you can never get to critical mass to make it happen. In my home state in Massachusetts, we passed campaign finance reform, and we got money out of our elections as a referendum. And then the Democrats, who own the legislature, have 80% in progressive Massachusetts, they repealed campaign finance reform, which told me that if the Democrats can't even support campaign finance reform, it's hopeless, time to move on, which I did a long time ago, and have never looked back, and have only had that decision affirmed by the course of history. Democrats will forever lead you back into the fairy tale of hope. And they will throw you under the bus again the minute they have the power to actually do something about it. They won't. So, that's why we need a political challenge And we need an agenda that can assemble enough everyday people that we can get to critical mass. And it has to be a diverse agenda. Democracy is part of that agenda, but people are so busy trying to survive right now, you know, to not get deported, to have a job, to get out of student debt, to stay alive and get the health care that they need, to not be drinking polluted water. People are very busy surviving from today till tomorrow. So the democracy issues seem a little bit almost privileged for a lot of people. Not, you know, they're absolutely essential. So they have to be part of a broader coalition and a general green uprising, I think, whose time has come. Okay. We do. So we'll do another stab here. The blonde woman, and then Aiden, a candidate also from Berkeley. So, yeah, Berkeley. And then Mel over here, number 3. This gentleman here, number 4, and the green hat, number 5. All right. 1.
Well, first off, mine's not a question. I started out watching Reagan be first elected. I was die-hard Republican my entire life. I grew up. When I started voting, I voted my politicians were Republicans, but I was reading the measures and everything, and they didn't, you know, so I would vote my conscience on that. After I actually in college was on Devin Nunes's initial campaign, and when he got in office, I was lost, and I had no idea. I didn't want to be part of the Republican Party. I didn't know where to go anymore, and so I pretty much was like, what are we voting for? Because they all lie. And I watched you on Redacted Tonight, the very first time you ran, and I really like what she has to say, and I started reading up on everything you had to say, and I voted for you then, and I voted for you the second time, and thank you for being there to let me know there are other people out there worth voting for and worth fighting for our country. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, you know, that's just like, what should we say, proof of principle, you know. I think this is the great silenced majority who basically share basic human values that are denied, you know, that are missing in action from our corporate-sponsored political system, which is intended to mislead you, to delude you, to, you know, to sell you a bill of goods and then just, you know, throw you out. And most people don't want that. And I think there are enough of us out there that we're going to change things. So thank you so much for coming tonight. Number 2, let's see. Yes, 80.
So my question specifically about the recount. So I was actually one of the Green Party members that signed the do not do the recount letter supported by Margaret Flowers. And so my biggest question is, I haven't really seen the flow of funding or publicity from the National Committee on local elections in California. All we focused on was congressional. That's where all the money and the traffic went. However, me as a candidate really struggled because we didn't get that streamlined process. And I was tipped off, it was partially because of the auditing with the recount. And so, can I just ask for everyone, clear the elephant in the room, we felt it was an undemocratic decision. Why did you go through it?
Okay, so why did I do the recount? I ran for Secretary of State in 2006, and I learned about black box voting at that time. And I learned that corporations control voting machines, and we do not have the right to inspect those voting machines. It's all discretionary. It's not subject to inspection or validation. There's minimal, just sort of superficial inspection of it. So it is it's a disaster waiting to happen that may actually be happening right now, and we have absolutely no way of knowing. And at the time, I became totally convinced that if I ever had the opportunity to actually force sunshine into this process, I was going to do that. Now, the way recounts work, they are not decisions of parties. Parties have no legal standing and nothing to say about it. You know that our presidential candidates, on a couple of occasions, undertook recounts, which I was always very proud of, and always, I think, did the party proud. So I was actually shocked to learn that anybody thought it was controversial. But at the end of the day, this was a decision that only a candidate could make. And I'm very glad that I did it. I could not have lived with myself to have had the opportunity to inspect a very devious, suspicious election and not have tried. And we weren't going to do the routine recount, just stick it back into the machine and whitewash it. We were going to do a real recount, which is why we got so much resistance. And I think the resistance that we got validates the importance of doing it, and it validates the importance of keeping the heat on and continuing to hold their feet to the fire until we get the reforms that we need in order to have a voting system we can trust, which we don't. There you go. Let's see, 3.
Actually, it was the resistance to the recount that we have to thank that Scott Walker is no longer governor of Wisconsin. What I wanted to just say, you know, especially after you said that, you know, what the Green Party really has a ability to do is to go in on the community level and push for a Green New Deal and demonstrate our values in the face of crisis. So myself, Eric Reibert, Sadie Fulton, we've been on the ground on the campfire, as well as Greens from Butte County, Nevada County, Humboldt County, Sacramento, and Yolo, have been joining forces on the ground with grassroots, community-led efforts to help people in this crisis. It's really hard to kind of portray how bad the crisis is there right now.
Drop the homeless population of Los Angeles on Porterville. That's how bad it
Yes,
is.
basically, 40,000 homeless people documented in Los Angeles. That's a city of 9 million. We have 52,000 homeless people right now on the streets of Chico, or displaced people put upon Chico, which is a city of 100,000. That's how bad it is. We were very happy to be breathing regular polluted air in Chico, where the air pollution is off the charts. I can't think of any other time when the Green New Deal is so needed as right now. And like everything that Jill has been talking about is, you know, absolutely like, you know, bringing to bear right now. But just wanted to make a sort of pitch for if you'd like to help community efforts on the ground. All of us Greens, we've joined forces with basically ad hoc community grassroots response called North Valley Mutual Aid. If you go to GoFundMe/North Valley Mutual Aid with dashes instead of spaces, you know, that's basically the group that has come together, about 200 community members in Chico who have come to help, you know, the most vulnerable in this crisis, the people who are falling through the cracks of the traditional humanitarian agencies and the shelter system. You know, we have the answers, and we also, you know, are on the ground trying to be there for our communities when this is happening. This is a crisis that's affecting our whole state and our whole country. And, you know, we can prove the proof in our pudding that the Green New Deal is an answer and it is a solution, you know, because we're trying to implement it on the ground right now. So thank you for that. And again, you know, it's just it's such a synergy because everything that we've been talking about is really like, you know, I don't know, it's here for all to see right now. So thank you.
Exactly. Thank you. Big thank you to Mel as well, and our little green contingent here. Thanks for representing us. So, let's see. In the hat, yes. Oh, let's see. Actually, this gentleman.
So, hello, just Stein. My name is Rob Garcia. I'm a community leader here in Porterville. I was born and raised here. I even went to this high school, so thank you very much for for stopping by, and thank you Green Party for approving my hometown and my birth town. One thing I want to talk about is economics. In college, I went to school for economics and political science and all that other fun stuff. And so I understand that we're all for the raising of the minimum wage, right? And I'm in for it too. But one thing that concerns me is not that prices are going to go up because we raise minimum wage. That's a myth. That's just not going to happen. It's called the velocity of money. People at the bottom are going to spend more money naturally because they have to than the people at the top. That's just the way it works. Well, right now, as the month of October, ended like half a month ago, inflation was about 2.5%, and that's not because the rise of minimum wage. That's just the way it goes, right? So my question is that right now, or I guess more like I'd like to get your opinions or your thoughts. Right now, we're pushing for that $15 an hour, right? Well, soon we may have to push for $17, and then $20 an hour, and then so on and so forth, because inflation is just going to keep going on and on and on, and next thing you know, maybe not in our lifetimes. Hopefully I'm exaggerating a lot, but I don't want the future to be our children or our grandchildren fighting for a $100 minimum wage. But essentially what I'm saying is that we can fight and raise the minimum wage all we want and be successful at it all we want, but if we don't control the rate of inflation and keep that in check, essentially it's where does it end, and how are we gonna just essentially it's gonna be like every time we push the boulder up the hill, it comes back down and you have to raise the minimum wage again. So rather than just raising the minimum wage to keep up with inflation, how are we going to keep inflation in check? Or what would be your thoughts on different ideas to keep inflation in check?
Yeah, so one thing I'll just say is that if wages now actually rose with inflation from back in like 1968, they would be more like 20-something, $23, $25 an hour. So yeah, and productivity skyrocketed, but wages didn't rise. So if we were to link wages to productivity, then workers would be getting what they deserve. And right now the problem is that they're not getting nearly enough, even if they were at $15 an hour. In most parts of the country is not a living wage either. So I would love to get to that point where we have to worry about $100 an hour minimum wage. That would be a great problem to have. We don't have that right now. We have just workers who are living paycheck to paycheck. 80% of American workers, in fact, can't, have to worry about how they're going to keep a roof over their heads, and, an entire generation that's locked in debt. So, and people can't afford their health care or their housing. So I feel like the overpayment of workers is kind of a theoretical problem at this point. At this point, I think we really need to work very hard on just getting wages up to the point where people can survive. It's outrageous that Jeff Bezos, in the course of, I think it takes him 11 seconds to make what most workers make in a whole year. He makes about